Have you ever wondered where the television signal you are watching is coming from?
Welcome to True North.
Good evening and welcome to Maine Watch.
Welcome to From the Vault, a celebration of 60 years of Maine public television. On this episode, we revisit a couple interviews with Maine authors who have new works coming out in the near future. They are both from the series A Good Read with Sandy Phippen. First up, we go to 2004 for a rare sit-down interview with Stephen King. It's quite a candid conversation as he is speaking with his friend and fellow author, Sandy Phippen. And, shocker, Stephen has another novel just out titled Fairy Tale. There is a longer version of this interview available. Check out Passport at mainepublic.org to see the extended version. Then we head north to the Allagash for a 2001 conversation with Cathie Pelletier, who occasionally writes under the pen name K.C. McKinnon. Cathie has a new book out in a few months titled Northeaster, an account of the Great New England Blizzard of 1952. She is also putting out some fascinating stories related to that each week on her Facebook page. Let's start with a visit to the master of horror himself as we go back to 2004 for A Good Read with Sandy Phippen.
I always wrote out of a real articulated feeling that what I wanted to do to the reader was to hurt the reader and to also exhilarate the reader at the same time. It's not all a negative thing, but I think the book should be approached with caution by the reader, that the book should be something that's really alive and really dangerous in a lot of ways. You know, like one of those UXBs in World War II. You know, be careful and don't reduce fiction to this kind of intellectual game, because that's not what it's supposed to be about.
Production of A Good Read on Maine PBS is made possible in part by Bangor Savings Bank and its subsidiaries, Bangor Securities, Bangor Insurance, and Advanced Payroll Plus. Online at bangor.com.
Stephen King has been termed the master of modern horror, but the fact remains that King is more than just a literary phenomenon. He's an international cultural phenomenon, as well as a winner of the National Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. Hi, I'm Sandy Phippen, your host for A Good Read, and I hope that you enjoy the following interview with Stephen King, in which King's brilliance and intensity, as well as his down-to-earth Maineness, are on display. Steve, you once said your muse is a guy with a flat top and coveralls. Mm-hmm. Who's your muse now?
Same guy.
Oh, same guy. He hasn't changed any.
No, he hasn't changed. Same guy.
Hasn't even aged?
No.
Oh,
I don't think he has. Still, you know, get to work. It's time to have fun.
Right.
Let's go. Let's roll.
Now, you told me some time ago that everything you write is about Maine.
Well, I don't know if you'd say everything that I write is about Maine. I grew up here. This is the place that I know the best. And I do believe, I subscribe to that maxim that you should write what you know. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you're writing stuff that's supernatural, stuff that's fantasy, it becomes even more important to write about what you know, to really ground things in reality. Now, there comes a point where you have to say to yourself, maybe I need a change. Maybe I need to vary my diet a little bit. And after Carrie and Salem's Lot, my wife and I had a little money by that point, and I said to her, I really think we ought to go somewhere else for a while and get a little feel for another part of the country, and I'll write a book. And she said, do you have a book in mind? And I said, no. And she said, do you have a place in mind? And I said, no. And what we ended up doing was we had the Rand McNally Road Atlas, and we opened it to the big map of the United States. And I closed my eyes and poked, and it came out in Colorado. And we ended up living there for about a year. And I think the reason that we didn't stay was because there was such a wide disparity between the young people at the university and the people. They were kind of like white-collar workers from IBM. We didn't feel comfortable, and some of that is the Maine that you take with you. It didn't feel the same. And when I look back on the Colorado books, there's The Shining, there's The Stand, those are the two main ones, I still see in the characters the sensibility, the kind of Maine working class people that I grew up with. They're in Colorado, but I really took my Maine with me. So,
And don't,
you know, by starting out and saying your postulate was wrong, I've come around to say probably it's right. You carry your place with you where you go.
you also said, I don't believe in Maine literature.
No, I still don't.
And because
I still don't.
And could you talk about that a little bit? It's like it's American literature.
Well,
All labels are
you
bad.
know, we talk a little bit about local color. And if you were to ask me to pick out a number of stories that were local color, I could find a couple. The Reach is one that I think of as local color. There's a short story called Uncle Otto's Truck. And used to be when we would go through Sweden, Maine to Lovell, there was a truck, this old truck sitting on one side of the road, and I used to call it the Black Point Road Memorial Tourist Truck because it just looked right there. It had the mountains in the background, and you could imagine people stopping and taking pictures. And I asked somebody about it finally at the local diner, and the guy said, you know, he's a funny man. He had a little tiny house right across the road, and the waitress said, he says that he has to keep an eye on that truck because it's creeping up on him all the time. And I thought, that's wonderful. I got to write a story about that. In the end, you say to yourself, really, what am I interested in here? Am I interested in plot or am I interested in scenery? And the answer is really, I want to tell stories. But you try to be as true as you can. I think you'd agree to this. If you're writing fiction, you try to be as true as you can in every possible way that you can, and that includes the places that you're writing about.
Even though you're lying.
Even though you're lying, especially because you're lying, you know.
It seems to me that Maine people aren't comfortable in too many places. They always want to get home. You must have experienced that in Florida, because now you're living in Florida in the wintertime.
Well, Florida, frankly, is too crowded for me, and there's too many people from away. I'm from away when I'm down there. And you get yourself into a funny situation when you go south, when you become a snowbird. You find yourself all of a sudden in a place where it's crammed with tourists in the winter. And if you're in Maine in the summertime, it's crammed with tourists. They're just from different parts of the country. So instead of finding it's 3 months of the year and then the tourists come home, it's 6 or 7 months of the year and you go home because you're the tourist, and you get it. You see what it's like with the shoe on the other foot.
Did you move down there after the accident? Is that why you moved down there?
We actually had been in Florida 1 or 2 winters before that accident happened, and I guess maybe everything comes back to Maine somehow, because my wife and I both grew up in Maine. Tabby's from Old Town, and I'm from down in the southern part of the state, and we raised our family here. We have 3 kids, and our youngest one, Owen, went to Bangor High School, and when he was done with that, he went to college in New York, and about 2 years into that experience, we looked at each other one day and said, what the hell are we doing here in the wintertime? Why are we freezing our butts off in February and shoveling off the driveway and going down the steps like a couple of old people, which is what we're getting to be? Oh, watch out, there's a patch of ice here, look out for that. Did you put down the salt and the rest of the stuff? And we kind of looked at each other and said, we're wealthy. We're well-to-do. Why are we staying here? And the answer was just because we always have. So we picked up and we moved, and after I'd had the accident where the guy hit me, everything ached and burned, and, you know, it just, to get down there was a real treat to get into the warmth. And we're like anybody else from Maine, probably Michigan's the same way. The first thing that I always do in the morning is to turn on the TV and see what they're getting hit with up north.
When did you first feel that you were successful as a writer? I mean, was it The Shining, or when?
There always comes a moment in a writer's life, a magic moment, where you're reading something and you say, I do better work than this. And that's a milestone. In terms of success, I would say that there was a time, and I've written about this, so beg pardon to anybody who's heard the story before. We'd been down to see my mother. We had 2 small kids. I was working at New Franklin Laundry in Bangor, and I was sending stories out mostly to men's magazines because they would buy. They didn't pay very well, but they paid a hell of a lot better than the $1.65 an hour that I was making at New Franklin. And we came back from a visit downstate, and my daughter was howling her head off. She had an ear infection, and that meant that we needed amoxicillin. We just called it the pink stuff. And it was expensive, and we didn't have the money for it. And we got back to our apartment on Grove Street in Bangor, and there was a letter in the mailbox from Dugent Publications, and they had bought a story of mine for $500, which was top dollar then. And my wife was unloading the car and saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to get the amoxicillin? How are we going to get the pink stuff? And I said, it's no problem. I have a check here for a story, and there's going to be plenty of money for the stuff. And you know, there were other things, there were much bigger checks that came along later, but that was the best. You know, to be able to say to my wife, we can take care of this. And the reason we can take care of it is because I wrote our way out.
That's right, you did write your way out. Did Maine hurt you into writing?
No, Maine didn't hurt me into writing. Maine was just there. It was just a fact of my life. I remember I went to a one-room school in Durham, grades 1 through 8. I mean, I only went there 2 years, and then they opened the big 4-room school down the road by the Grange Hall. But I remember Miss Heisler, who taught all those grades. We had a reader, and the name of the reader was Roads to Everywhere. And she said, that's Durham, roads to everywhere. You got your road to the dump, you got your road to the school, you got your road to the parsonage, you know, all the rest of it. And for me, that's the important part about where you live. When you know where the roads go, all of them, not just the, you know, there's a part in this forthcoming Dark Tower book that I wrote. There's an old caretaker, John Cullum, who's a character in there, and he has to get past these police roadblocks to rejoin his friends. And this guy, Eddie, says, do you mean to tell me that you don't know 3 or 4 ways out around these city slickers? And he says, well, I might know 4 or 5. And then he pauses and he says, 6. And then he pauses again and he says, actually, 11. And that's the way that it is when you grow up in a place like that. So Maine has hurt me, but did it hurt me into writing? No.
I heard you tell kids this, that you wrote out of anger. You wrote out of hate, in fact.
I wrote out of, I don't know about hate exactly, but
It was
there was a lot of rage in a lot of the work that I wrote. But I have a feeling about what the purpose of literature is, and I'm still impatient with people who write in a kind of a dry, intellectual way. And I've spoken a lot of times in my younger days about John Updike, who drove me crazy that way, and then John Updike's literary son, Jonathan Franzen, nowadays. And my idea about what literature is supposed to be is this kind of a sweaty, close-up thing. I think about, you know, you go to a nightclub or a honky-tonk somewhere out in the country, a bottle club, and it gets to be almost the end of the night, Saturday night, and everybody's drunk and everybody's dancing, you know, so close. You know, Edward Albee in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf calls it monkey nipples. And that's, in a way, what I think literature is supposed to be, that thing that reaches out and grabs you and just pulls you into this sweaty embrace and won't let you go. And it's sexy, but it's angry.
All the basic emotions.
All the basic emotions, but I always wrote out of a real articulated feeling that what I wanted to do to the reader was to hurt the reader and to also exhilarate the reader at the same time. It's not all a negative thing, but I think the book should be approached with caution by the reader, that the book should be something that's really alive and really dangerous in a lot of ways. You know, like one of those UXBs in World War II. You know, be careful and don't reduce fiction to this kind of intellectual game, because that's not what it's supposed to be about.
And I want to talk about Marguerite Yourcenar now, the immortal who lived in Northeast Harbor. She said a quote that I thought was great once when she said that writers don't create, they arrange. Do you agree with that? Do you see yourself as an arranger?
No, I don't. I really think that the stories are found articles, and
like you found Uncle Otto's truck.
yeah,
Right.
and the story basically will tell itself. That my job is to get as much of it out unbroken and undamaged. It's archaeological in that sense, but to arrange things.
Well,
I can't even arrange characters' names. No, I see myself as more of an archaeologist than a set decorator.
Probably I was being unfair to her. I just remembered I didn't quote the whole thing. She said that everything is already there.
Yeah, everything is there.
So you would agree with that?
I would agree with that completely, yeah. I do understand that, though. You know, I can think of books that I've written where you see that design, and there's a delight in finding it. I wrote a short novel called Apt Pupil, and just began with a concept. What would happen if a young American boy discovered that a Nazi war criminal was living in his neighborhood? And taking it from there, the story just simply played out before me, and I did start to see a real design where I started to see this boy replicate the evil old man. It was a lot of fun to watch that thing happen. So it's a gruesome story, but it was wonderful fun to write, to watch that design play itself out.
In your writing book, which I want to talk at length about, On Writing, which I think is a wonderful book, incidentally, and should be taught in all the schools.
Thank you. With the writing book, what I did, when I turned in the manuscript of that, the editor came back to me, well, the publisher came back and said, well, there's some scatological language in here. There's some barnyard language in here. What do you think about this? It's going to be a problem getting these books, this particular book, in the secondary schools, the high schools, not so much in college if they want to use it. And I said, good. I'd like it to be a little bit of an outlaw text, if it could be, because I think that kids, you know better than I would, you've taught a lot of years, that if you give it to them and say, take this book home, put a book jacket on it, I don't know, Red Riot's book jacket, and you're going to take care of it and give it back at the end of the year, right away they think that's a dumb book. But if it's something that they can't, that they have to go and buy themselves, they take it a little more seriously.
Yes, I think you're right about that. That's true. So why news about you quitting writing? Quitting publishing, whatever.
Because I've said a lot of what I have to say. I see myself going back and repeating themes and formats, places that I've been before. The story about the writer who is sort of bitten by his own work and crosses the line into fantasy land. And I think that I've done all the major monsters that I ever really wanted to deal with. If those were unresolved conflicts from my childhood, they're pretty nicely resolved, thank you very much. And the other thing is, I've been working off and on since I was about 22 on this series of fantasy novels called The Dark Tower. And while some of the people who read the books are very irritated because they've come slowly compared to my other stuff over a course of years, really my mind never leaves rolling in that other world. And there are a lot of the books that show up in one form or another. There are characters from a lot of the other books that show up in the Gunslinger books. And I knew way back in 1974, the last time that we see Father Callahan at Salem's Lot, he's rolling out of town on a Greyhound bus, maybe rolling into Hartford, and he disappears from the book. And I thought to myself, I have not seen the last of that man. And working on The Wolves of the Kala, the fifth of the Dark Tower books, in 2001, sure enough, he showed up right on schedule, you know, in this other world, and slotted right in where he was supposed to be. Dinky Earnshaw from Everything's Eventual shows up in these books. A lot of different characters from a lot of stories. So in a way, the Dark Tower series was the culmination. It was like putting a bow on top of everything. And it almost seems to me that after that, where I am actually a character in this book, that it's pretty well, you know, that's it. It's all finished.
Do you see yourself, really, Steve, as a dark man?
No.
With a good heart?
No. I think that everybody has a dark man and a dark woman inside.
Right.
And one of the things that attracts people to my books or to fiction that's a little bit on the scary side is that it gives you a chance to explore that in relative safety,
Right.
that side of your character.
You said this a long time ago. I maintain that my novels taken together form an allegory for a nation that feels it's in a crunch and that things are out of control. Do you still feel that even more so now?
I think that it's all of these things, the scary things, are allegories and ways of trying to deal with very real problems. And I think that a lot of us do feel that we're out of control in our lives and that we don't have a lot of impact over what we're doing. So sure, the answer to that is yes.
And you also said, too, that violence is a way of working things out.
It is.
A lot of people.
It is, and a lot of people, you know, for better or for worse.
It's like the anger in our writing and trying to get it out there.
You know, the story about the Gordian knot, the guy doesn't even bother trying to untie it, just whoosh.
I know you've written about the connection between humor and horror. Could you talk about that a bit? I mean, I've been reading now for a month all these critics and stuff about you, that it's the humor. They don't think it's being serious.
Oh, they don't get it, man. I wrote one book that got absolutely trashed critically. I mean, any book that I published, you can find 5, 6, 7 reviews that say, this guy is a really terrible writer. He's a hack, he's he's this and that.
Sophomoric.
But yeah, sophomoric. You can find other critics for a lot of those books where they'll say, this is a pretty good book. And my feeling is that always you balance the two things out, and then you can reject the whole mess. The only time that you've got a problem is that everybody's saying the same thing. And I wrote a book called Needful Things in 1986 that was my idea of a comedy. It was a comedy about the Reagan years, the idea being that this man came to a small town, opened like a junk shop, and you could buy anything that you wanted, but you ended up paying with your soul. And I thought that book was hilarious, and I got terrible reviews. If you see it as a comedy, then it's successful. But apparently, once you get a reputation for being that sort of girl, you know, that's it.
They pigeonhole you and they put you in these categories. That's right, exactly. Don't you think it's true? It's like what Seamus Heaney, the famous Irish poet, said, that you have to know, to grow up in a place and to write about it well, you have to know about the inner complexities. And that's the problem with a lot of stuff written about Maine. The people who move here and try to write about it didn't go to school here like we did in one-room schoolhouses, didn't pay their dues that way. They didn't know. So they're not aware of the inner complexities. I like that theme.
You can write about Maine if you're from away, if you write a story about somebody who's from away who comes to Maine.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that, do you?
No, not at all.
No.
No.
But if you want to write from the standpoint of saying, here is a story about Maine and Maine people,
Right.
I think that you have to grow up here, just as you said. And I do think that there's a big similarity between, say, the Southern Gothic of Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner and what I write or what you write.
That's right.
But there are differences. There's a difference between the Southern sensibility and the Northern sensibility, if only because up here we don't have that skeleton of segregation and slavery in our closet. We might have some other ones, you know.
We have other
It's
ones.
different in different places, but I do think that one of the reasons that people come to regional fiction is to understand a little better a place that maybe they've only visited, to see the inner heart
That's
of
right.
that place.
Now, you weren't surprised, for instance, what I was trying to get at is, and I know you know this, the subterranean, unreported Maine, down beneath the lovely little New England towns and so on. There's this other world that goes unreported. I mean, the arsenic poisonings in New Sweden couldn't have surprised you.
What a story, though,
Yeah,
huh?
yeah, great
What a
story.
story.
Great story, yes. Incredible, really.
Probably not for the people who lost loved ones and stuff, but I understand what you mean.
Yes, that's right. That's what I'm.
That goes back, I think, well, you could probably trace it way back to Edward Arlington Robinson and other people, but really, the person who tore the lid off the small New England town was Grace Metalius.
Oh,
and
yes.
there was a real reaction
Peyton Place, yes.
to Peyton Place, I think, because it was so sexy and so raw. It wasn't just sex, if you go back and read it. There's insanity, incest, all this other stuff.
Raymond Chandler said, writing is an extension of personality. And that's one thing that I wish you'd commented on more in the writing book. You touched upon it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why we can't crank out William Faulkner's and Stephen King's is because you have a certain personality.
Yeah, I didn't touch on that in the writing book because I didn't think of it. You know, a lot of times we give big, complicated, you know, educated sounding answers, but the fact is, when I wrote the second half of that book, I was recuperating from this accident, and I'm not trying to lay it off on that, but there were a lot of things. First of all, the book on writing, I thought it would be a snap, a breeze, a walk in the park. Wasn't. It was hard. It was surprisingly hard, a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And when I finished it, and the book is like this thick, and you know, if you've seen it and The Stand, this thick, I thought, is this really all you have to say about the art and craft in writing? And apparently it was. But I do believe that writing is an extension of personality, and makes me think of Paul McCartney saying to John Lennon at some point after the Beatles became famous, he said, wouldn't it be great to start all over again, to go out and play as Morris and the Masked Men? We could go on stage wearing masks, and we could play, you know, gigs in small clubs and that sort of thing. And John Lennon laughed at him and said, they'd know it was you, mate, as soon as you played the first chord. They'd recognize your style of play, and they'd recognize your voice. And I have some experience with that. I wrote a number of books under the name Richard Bachman just to see what would happen. They were done as paperback originals. There were 3. And then I did a book called Thinner that was done as a hardcover. And when I got out there, people sampled the style. And I started to get letters through the publisher addressed to Richard Bachman saying, geez, you write just like Stephen King. And a lot of them were angry at me for that. Well, you know, you can't copy him.
Well, when you say you're done with writing again, done with publishing.
I really can't imagine giving up writing.
No.
I love to write. It's a blast.
Right.
But I can see myself saying, like, don't publish this. You'll just embarrass yourself. People will say, he's eating his own tail. I don't really want to go
But
there.
couldn't you see yourself? I mean, you've tried everything, which is great. I think that's what that's what writers should do, shouldn't they? I mean, you've done.
It keeps it fresh if you try different formats and that sort of thing.
And aren't there more poems? I mean, there's something about 50 poems you wrote once. Would there be an anthology of Stephen King poetry?
Oh God,
chance?
there are probably 500, 600 poems that I have in different places.
So
I love poetry, and I've written a bunch of it, but it's not very good.
But still, I could see that being a book. And what about a travel book? I mean, you've traveled around
I'm
the
doing
world.
a play with John Mellencamp.
Oh, you are?
It's a musical. He came to me with an idea that he'd actually culled out of True Detective magazines. He's from Indiana, and he found a crime, what we would call a crime passionnel, from the 40s, where 2 brothers had had a falling out over a girl, and one of them had been killed. And I don't want to go into details because that's the story. And he said, you know, I would love to write the music for this if you wanted to try the book. And I said, yes, okay, let's try that. And I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I've written like a 67-page treatment. I'm ready to sit down and do it. Other things intervened. But the reason I said yes was because the subject matter buzzed me. It turned my dials, but also because it was something that I hadn't tried before. And if you're only going to get to go to the dance once, you ought to do more than just the box step waltz. You ought to try some of these other things. So that's what I'm doing.
A number of years ago, you told me that you were writing a script for Steven Spielberg. Whatever happened to that?
You never forget anything.
No, I got
Sandy Phippen never forgets anything.
Along with the police. No.
Yeah, Sandy knows everything, just like the police. Steven Spielberg and I have tried to work together, I think 3 times. There's The Talisman, there was Poltergeist, and there was some kind of an original deal. I don't remember what that was, but it's always been a case of two strong creative personalities, and Steven Spielberg is an extremely intelligent man, and he is just fiercely creative. Wherever you go with Steven, unless you're very, very quick, Steven is 2 steps ahead of you. He's like Michael Jordan to the basket almost. I don't want to say Michael Jordan. I want to say Scottie Pippen, I think. Somebody who's little and quick, and they have always got you boxed out, sucker, you know. And I'm not that fast, but I've been writing for 30 years, and I've gotten used to having my own way. And we have a plaque in our garage that says, if you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. And I think that's basically the problem. It was always a question about who was going to be the lead dog. So we haven't made it work yet, but you know, maybe we will.
Did you have anything to do with the play on Broadway of Carrie? There was a musical of Carrie.
No,
you didn't do that.
The only thing that I had to do with that was saying yes, saying okay, I'm willing to let you do that. And again, it's the same thing. It's curiosity. I have a thing that I call the dollar deal. My accountant will roll his eyes and probably pull his hair out because I mentioned it. But basically, people write me letters and say, can I make a student film out of X, Y, or Z? And generally speaking, if nobody has the film rights to X, Y, and Z. I just had a kid come to me before we started this interview, a letter that my assistant gave me, saying he wanted to make a student film out of Secret Window, Secret Garden, and they're now filming that. And so for legal reasons, they have to tell this kid no. But if they're not, you know, under contract with somebody, I will say to them, yeah, you can make a film out of it. You can make your student film, but you can't do it for profit. You got to pay me $1, and you've got to send me a copy of the finished film on a DVD or a videotape.
Fair enough. That's right.
Yeah, it is. But you know, the entertainment value is great because some of them are just friggin' hilarious.
Of course.
I did a story called The Sundog one time, and it's a pretty scary story, and this kid did it as a Gumby deal, and I just fell on the floor. It was wonderful. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Your band, the Rock Bottom Remainders, and maybe we have to explain Remainder to the audience that Remainders are books that are selling. Do you still do it? What happened to the band?
The band played a tour on the West Coast in the spring, and I wasn't able to do it because of writing commitments, a TV series called Kingdom Hospital. And
so they're still
the Dark
going
Tower
on.
books.
They're
Yeah,
still
they
going
play. They play.
Okay.
Somebody said a funny thing though. He said, really, the Remainders without Stephen King is like the Grateful Dead without Jerry Garcia, which I thought was really sweet.
That's a great
I
compliment.
never, you know, played the guitar like Jerry Garcia or sang like anybody in particular, but it's a lot of fun to go out and do something that's more of a hobby than work. Because, you know, what we do is a funny thing. Writing is almost like a hobby even when you do it professionally, because you only do it for a short period of time every day. I guess some people do it all day long. I don't know how they do it. I work about 4 hours a day, and you don't really know what you're up to until it's done, and if you're very, very lucky, somebody pays you money for it. So,
what about rock music, man? We got to go to that because you write to rock music.
Sure.
And
yeah.
you still do. Has it changed? I mean, what are you writing to now? Metallica, you mentioned at one point.
Well, I don't think it's changed that much. It's changed in one way. I got this wonderful gadget that's called an XM radio. It's a satellite radio. There are no commercials. It just pulls it down from the satellite, and channel 12 is cross country. It's a kind of a cross between rock and roll music and country music, and I just love it. I just crank it up, and a lot of times I write to that. But you get older and you get peanut butter in your gears. They get a little bit sticky, and nowadays I used to just crank the music, and I'd write first draft, and it never bothered me. You know, that's the part where you're snatching it right out of the air and putting it on the page. Rewrite is a different thing entirely, as you well know.
Yes.
And with me,
Do you switch to classical music?
No, I don't. I still listen to rock and roll, but generally when I'm writing first draft, I don't listen to anything at all anymore. I've driven my wife crazy. I wrote this the last 3 volumes of The Dark Tower, and they're about 2,500 pages total. It's a manuscript that's like this. And I discovered this dance mix, Lou Bega Mambo No. 5, and I played it over and over and over again. And one day, when we were at our house by the lake, it was between tracks, and I was upstairs, and there's an open space that goes down to the great room below, and I heard my wife saying to the housekeeper, "He just plays that to spite me."
What about classical music, though? You weren't turned on by that when you were
Never
a
listened
kid?
to it. You know, I'm doing a column now for Entertainment Weekly once a month, and I said, you know, on general principles, no pop music can come into my house with an artist that only has one name, okay? There's that woman, Beyonce, and I thought, well, all right, she's not allowed in my house, and then I found out she's actually Beyonce Knowles, so that's okay.
And Cher's okay.
Well, Cher is not really okay, actually. No, I'm afraid not. My idea is rock and roll, the louder the better.
Okay. All right, what about today, though, with hip-hop and rap music?
I like Eminem. I understand Eminem. I think that he's funny. I think that he's clever. I think that he's really angry. And in a lot of ways, I recognize a kindred spirit. Here is somebody who really wants to use his art form to hurt people. And if only, I mean, you say it that way and it sounds so negative, but it's like, hey, wake up. There's a whole other world, bunkie. You know, get your freak on. Here it is.
When you're writing, a real writer, you go over the lines like that, when you know how it's going to work out, that's exciting. That's when it's joyful. And
there's a lot of exciting things about the job. It's still the best part of my day.
Right.
You know, I work from maybe 8 until noon, and I get up and I'm as excited about it as I used to be. I made friends with Evan Hunter, who writes under the name Ed McBain, last year. He's also a boy from the Northeast who kind of fled down to Florida, and he's down there winters, and he's in his mid-80s now. And I said, and he's written, you know, people call me prolific. This guy's written maybe 150 novels, and they're good. They're not like John Creasy, who wrote 400, but they're not very good books. And I said to Evan, do you still like it? And he said, I love it. You know, so that's something that doesn't wear out. The Amish have a thing that they say, kiss and don't last, cook and do. You know, and it's to some extent, it's true that writing lasts too.
one of the reasons Stephen King's writings will last is because he understands small towns. He grew up poor in Maine and has a good sense of community that is innate. Many big city critics don't seem to understand or fully appreciate this, and how the fragile balance of life in a small town can be easily upset by any kind of intrusion from away. King, a gifted writer with a good heart, does understand deeply, and it's this sense of community that runs through all his work. For a good read, I'm Sandy Phippen.
Can you see this on your camera? Moth magazine. This goes back to sold this in Pat's Pizza with George MacLeod.
When you were a kid, the Moth magazine at the University of Maine,
Yeah.
your poems, your 3 poems,
Right.
you had The Dark Man was
Right.
the first poem.
Here it is, The Dark Man.
Right.
I have stridden the fuming way of sun-hammered tracks and smashed cinders. I have ridden rails and burned sterno in the gantry silence of hobo jungles. I am a dark man. I have ridden rails and passed the smuggery of desperate houses with counterfeit chimneys, and heard from the outside the inside clink of cocktail ice, while closed doors broke the world, and over it all a savage sickle moon that bummed my eyes with bones of light. And it ends by saying, and a sign to those who creep in fixed ways, I am a dark man.
What do you do? I'm a writer. I don't wait for the muse to descend. I mean,
just
that's,
start
I don't
writing.
even know the muse. And so I said, you know what? If I waited for a muse to descend, my electricity would be cut off. Thomas Wolfe says you can't go home again. He meant that thought for the traveler. but it applies to those of us who barely leave the houses where we were born and raised, for the past is lost to us forever.
Hi, I'm Sandy Phippen, your host of A Good Read. Cathie Pelletier hasn't lived in Maine for 25 years, but she still can't help writing about us. She also put a fictitious place called Allagash on the map. Surrounded by storytellers while growing up in Allagash on the St. John River, Cathie knew she was a writer when she was still a young grade school student. She's been a prolific writer ever since, and now writes under two names, her own and the pen name of K.C. McKinnon. And after she skipped 2 grades, the 6th grade and her senior year in high school, writing came in handy.
I had already started writing. I even remember the first time I decided I have to put this on paper. It was snowing, and I was standing by the register at school, and it was clanking away, and the mittens were drying, and it started to snow. And I remember just being overwhelmed with this feeling, this sensation. It's like a baptism, I think, when I hear people talking about baptism, this coming into your body.
Or an epiphany or something.
An epiphany,
like that. Yes.
yeah. I wrote a poem about the snow coming down, and shortly thereafter, Kennedy was assassinated, and I took the pen full-time then because I thought someone has got to write about this woman crawling on the back of the trunk. She was my hero. And John saluting, and so I kept books. My father at that time started working for Fraser Paper Company, and they gave him a huge roll of paper. It was about this high. It was like a monster, this big white snowball of paper, and I would unroll it, as we all did, as we needed it, and we'd cut our own paper. So I made my books out of those, and I recorded the whole Kennedy saga.
Do those still exist,
No.
those little books?
No, and
too bad.
I wish they did. So the seeds were there, and when I jumped that grade, it was a social, an abrupt thing in my childhood. Nobody knew back then how to talk to a child about readjusting to another grade. I went from baseball and recess and no homework to a class where girls were wearing bras and straight skirts and putting on makeup and doing homework. It was a very traumatic jump. And there were some ladies in town not happy about it. Hi, ladies. And so I think that, you know how we've heard so many times that writers have to have a sense of isolation. You can have all kinds of variables there, but one thing that seems constant is a sense of isolation. And it can be in a crowded family, it can be, but you have a sense, and I think that's where mine fully developed, when I suddenly felt cut apart.
Didn't you feel different, though, even earlier, maybe? A little bit different?
Well,
being the baby in the family? No.
I think so, but not really. Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I knew that I wanted to write, but I don't know if I would have followed through with it.
Let's piece this together. You went to school right here in Allagash?
Yeah, I did.
Grammar school, first of all?
Grammar school, and I went 3 years of high school, and then I skipped my last year of high school as well.
Okay.
I went to Orono to summer school, and a couple of the professors there said, maybe you shouldn't go back to high school, maybe you should go on to college. And nobody was doing that back then.
Right.
And so they had to write letters of recommendation, and I had to be approved, and they decided that that was really, by that time I was ready to skip. The die had been cast.
So you were very young when you went to college then?
I was 16.
At college. It started at Fort Kent?
Yeah. I expelled when I just turned 17. I didn't rest on my laurels long. Yes. I was given their Distinguished Alumni Award after, in 1991, and it became an AP story, the idea that I'd been expelled and then was given the Distinguished Alumni Award.
Let's go back to your radicalism again, because was this because you were protesting? You know, civil rights was on, Vietnam?
Doesn't it sound like it's Angela Davis,
Yeah.
Abby Hoffman stuff? No, I wasn't good at following rules in the dormitory.
Okay, all right.
And,
oh yes, that was a big one then.
That was a big one then. And of course we had curfews, 11 o'clock.
And males and females were very separated.
Yeah, and a group of girls decided to pull a fire alarm one night, and my being the youngest and wanting to be the, wanting the attention, my hand was the one that pulled the fire alarm. That got me completely out of the dorm, that one. And then there was a little bit of campus unrest when they wanted to close Fort Kent down to a
Oh yes, that's right.
I can't remember. It was a 2-year program they wanted to
something
something
like
like that. And
Something like that.
we went and met with the chancellor above the president's authority in Fort Kent. So that was quite radical, I think.
Yeah, that was.
That's very
that
radical.
Was. Well, let's jump ahead now. So after you graduated from college, how did you get to Nashville? I guess that's what I'm leading up to. How did you leave Maine?
Oh my, let's see, after I was expelled for radicalism, which was pretty darn easy in 1970, I lit out across country hitchhiking. I hitchhiked through 43 states before I came home. My poor father, when he sees this, I called and said, could you wire me some money? And he said, where are you? And I said, Poplar Bluff. And he said, where is that? And I said, Missouri. Going through Tennessee, I fell in love with the visual rolling hills, and so I always knew that I was going to go back one day. And I did. I went to learn to write country songs and to go to graduate school at Vanderbilt, and I lasted a short time at Vanderbilt. I took Anglo-Saxon, which was the most stupid thing I've ever done in my life. But
We didn't talk about music, Cathie, then, because that's Music City. Did you listen to country and western music when you were a kid here growing up?
Well, it might have been called country and western then. Of course, it's country and has been since. No, it wasn't, because in 1948 it officially became known as just country.
Right.
But
Okay.
so when you go to Nashville, you don't say country and western. You're there to pitch a country and western song. You'll be shown the leading sign. My father played guitar and harmonica and fiddle, and so
Okay.
we'd wake up Sunday mornings hearing him singing, and so that, again, that's a part of the storytelling tradition. Those old country songs, very, very strong storytelling songs. So that was, you know, I had started writing folk songs, I guess, before that. And traveling, I moved to Canada, and that helped me so much with my writing. I think now of having read later where Ezra Pound said, without music, the poetry withers and dies. And I think that my attempts of writing songs, and I've had a couple cut. David Byrne of the Talking Heads cut one. I think that just made me listen a little more to the words and the internal rhymes and the subtlety of words.
Who were you thinking of when we were making love last night? Was it a good-looking stranger or a close friend of mine?
You still write songs?
I do. I dabble. I'm not, you know, I have friends who are professional songwriters, and so I don't want to diminish what they do. What they do is a very difficult job. But I still am interested in ideas that I know don't belong in prose. And so...
And plus you're in Nashville.
I'm in Nashville, and I have a lot of friends who are songwriters. So I keep thinking that one day I'm going to go back and really study the art of songwriting, which I've not really done. I've written a couple hundred songs, but I'm not as crafted as those guys. I mean, they can craft a song, and academics can say what they like about it. I'd much rather reach a whole lot of people than a few academics. And they're very good at what they do. I mean, there are bad songs. There's bad opera. There's bad anything. Achy Breaky Heart.
Yes.
But that's not the only music I listen to. But
So how'd you meet Jim Glazier?
Glazer.
Glazer.
When I hitchhiked, I spent 3 months in Portland, Oregon, or a month in Portland, Oregon before I came back. And I used to go to this place across the street from a piano bar, and never thought anything more of that. And when I got back to Fort Kent, the woman who used to play piano at that piano bar in Portland, Oregon, moved to Fort Kent to teach music. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. Yes.
After we became friends and got to talking, that's how we realized. And she had grown up on the farm next to the Glazer brothers. And, you know, Tom Paul was one of the outlaws with Waylon and Willie.
Where does it go? The good Lord only knows. Seems like it was just the other day.
And Jim Glazer had written Woman, Woman by Gary Puckett and all this, and had his own hits. And the Glazers had won so many awards as a group before Alabama and Oak Ridge Boys that Billboard gave them an award for winning the most awards.
Oh, that's great.
That was another award.
We're so award crazy.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and the Glazers had published Gentle on My Mind. They had one of the hottest studios in Nashville. What an experience for a young writer, because I suddenly started flying around the world with drivers taking us everywhere. It was amazing. You can't have an education like that.
No.
To be called and say, you want to go to Vienna, somebody's canceled, we're going in, you know, tomorrow, can you be packed? Or we're going to the United Kingdom for 5 weeks with the driver. I mean, that happened often. So
you met him and you stayed there.
16 and a half years. Well, we separated 2 or 3 times. I used to call us the Zelda and F. Scott of Music City.
You have a reputation for being wild there with Jim?
Well, we were both very stubborn, very forceful personalities, and that's probably why we stayed together 16 and a half years, trying to break the other's spirit, right? And then we really did separate, and we've remained very close friends. Jim came up here in May to sing at my mother's funeral because she asked him to sing 2 hymns, and so he took his guitar and got on a plane in Nashville and came up and sang the 2 hymns and went back the next day.
Oh, that's wonderful, Cathie. That's a great story.
He's a close friend of everyone in the family, so.
How come you never married, though, you two?
I never wanted to get married. There were a couple of times when I thought about it, because when somebody gets to be, you know, Jim was 15 years older than I. After a while, when you keep saying my boyfriend, and he's like, you know, 55, it sounds like your parents are waiting for you to come home from a date. There were a couple of times we thought, well, maybe we ought to get married. And it just didn't happen. And I never really wanted to get married. I just didn't want to do it. Didn't want to put my name on a piece of paper. And ended up turning 40 and getting married very quickly.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Tell us about Tom. We forgot about Tom. You know,
Who is Tom?
Your husband, whose last name I can't pronounce.
His last name is Viorakic in English, but his father would say Viorakic. My husband, he's Yugoslavian born when there was a Yugoslavia. He's actually born in Croatia. His father is Serbian, his mother Croatian. And then went to Italy and lived for a while, and then came to Canada.
Toronto, that's where you met him?
Yep. He's Canadian citizen since '72, I think. And so the whole family speaks several languages, and they're traveled everywhere. So they're a very interesting bunch.
The first book was The Funeral Makers, the book that brought you national attention.
Yep.
How'd that come about, Cathie, Funeral Makers? What happened?
Well, when I was about 16, I wrote a short story called Funeral Makers, and it stayed in my mind, the title. And when I moved to Tennessee, I didn't live in Nashville at first. I lived in Lebanon. And I became friendly with a family of undertakers who owned a recording studio. There wasn't one of them playing with a full deck in the entire family. And, you know, Southerners can be very eccentric in the most delightful way. And trust me, these people were eccentric. I mean, and so I used to hang out at the funeral parlor and the embalming room and all through there. And that gave me the idea for a family of, I thought, oh gosh, what about that story? So it has nothing to do with them. The only thing that I ever used that the head undertaker told me was that his mentor taught him a very grave lesson about undertaking. He said, son, you never bring him in at the toe, because that way all they see of their loved one is 2 nostrils. Bring him in at the head. So I thought, I might have to write a book so I can use that. I mean, I heard Spike Lee say something. I never thought I'd ever remember something Spike Lee says. He seems like a very angry man, but he said about the filmmakers who like to brag that they didn't know anything about filmmaking when they made their first film, that will probably work for a while, but eventually it's not going to work anymore.
Right.
You need to start studying your craft, and I think that's true of writing. I didn't know much at all about writing. I would have rewritten The Funeral Makers 10 more times. The way I write now, I'm very conscientious about draft. By the time a draft is ready to go out, I've rewritten it maybe 10 times or more.
Right.
It's hard to tell. I rewrite a lot. But now, then I went back and said, you know what, I want to learn more about writing. I've written 2 or 3 books kind of by the seat of my pants. I want to learn more, and so I started reading more.
This was after the trilogy? Wouldn't you call it the trilogy, the first 3 books?
Yeah, well, you know, Updike, I think it was, said we never write 4 books because no one knows what to call it. I think it's a tetralogy, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. It was around that time, but by the time I got to The Weight of Winter, it was actually my 4th book, and I spent a lot of time on Weight of Winter.
Right, yes,
It came out as my 3rd book, but it was
shows.
actually my 4th.
Yeah, it's your 3rd novel.
It was published 3rd, but it was the 4th book. I wrote Bubble Reputation
Oh, you
before
did?
that. I
Oh,
did.
it did.
I wrote it as my 2nd novel, and it was 800 of the most self-indulgent pages you will ever see in your life. I thought, well, The Funeral Makers was front page New York Times Book Review. People magazine did a story on me. I was going everywhere in the country. New Yorker. I mean, I thought, boy, this is, I'll just do this every time I write a book.
Yeah.
Is what I was thinking.
Yeah, you thought it was easy, didn't you?
Yeah,
You thought it
and
was
I thought, you know, my laundry list must be interesting to these people. I'll just whip something up and send it out. And if a cat went by and touched my leg, it was like Virginia Woolf. I typed it in. I spent a long time talking about why cats do the figure eights and the caudal glands and why they're marking and their scent. And anything and everything I knew I put in the 800 pages, which is sad. Some people know more than that. And my agent read it and said, if anyone does publish this, the critics will kill you. And I had to put it on the shelf and write another book, and that was very, very difficult. I think that's where most writers, many writers who do one book, fall by the wayside. It's the second book syndrome. And
that's right.
so I'm glad that I hung in there. And when I wrote Weight of Winter, I went back and took Bubble Reputation out, and I cut 400 pages out of it. So that's what I try to tell students when I would, you know, remind them, you might be in love with your writing, but trust me,
Right.
you've got to learn to edit yourself. As Larry Monahan scooped by with the town plow, snow was beating against the windows of the McKinnon homestead and spiraling down beneath the yard light. He didn't hear the coyotes as they rattled off a few yowls from the back field edging the woods. And he didn't hear the steady, calm breathing coming from the bedrooms of the old homestead. His mind was on other things as he listened to the scraping blade of the plow. It looked to him like he was going to have one hell of a busy winter. As he rounded the most treacherous bend in the Allagash road, the lights of the plow swept across the yard of the McKinnon house, proud old house, clinging for dear life to the banks of a proud old river. In the swirl of white snow, only the shutters stood out, black eyes open to the blustery night. Larry Monahan didn't know that just moments before, a light had been burning in one of the upstairs windows, the heart of the house glowing. Then the old homestead disappeared into the raging blackness behind him.
Did you plan on being away from Maine for 30 years?
No, no. Isn't it funny?
Yeah.
Where did 30 years go? How does that? I still feel 18.
Right.
How did that happen?
It goes fast.
Yeah, it does. But you know, other people, I think, you know how in small towns, especially rural areas, you're always told, oh, you got to go out to the city and make something of yourself. You've
Right.
got to go out and do something with your life. Well, why can't people stay on their soil of their ancestors and live their lives right there and be, as long as they do not ever feel trapped?
Right.
That's
right.
the only difference.
Right.
Then never leave home.
Well,
Stay.
I think the ones, don't you, and as a quick answer, the people who find love, find their life's mate early on, they seem to be pretty happy. People like that, raising their families.
You could be miserable and trapped.
Yes, you could, but I'm trying to think if they have a good job.
I'm not going to go this far, Sandy. I know too many unhappy people.
All right. Let's go to your new books, because you've changed your way of writing. You started calling yourself Cathie McKinnon. You have.
Well, I did for those books.
Why?
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
You know, my husband and I were in a bookstore on the waterfront in Toronto, near where we lived, and I was complaining about the bestsellers and moving writer-novelist friends up into the racks of the bestsellers.
Right.
This is what I do at airports. I put my writer friends in Oprah's book club thing.
Right.
Little boost. And Oprah can't read everybody, is my feeling. I'm like an unpaid assistant by putting some books in there that I think she'd like. And he said to me, why are you always complaining? You know, for 2 years I've heard you and your writer friends complaining about these more commercial books. Why don't you do it yourself? Why? And I thought, what a great question. There was almost a sense of snobbiness in the idea that, you know, you're not, if you write something very accessible, it's not supposed to be good literature or something.
Right.
And
Right.
I quit buying into that notion a long time ago, so I thought, he's right, I'm going to try it. And I did, and the first one's in 18 languages.
Right. That was the Dancing at the Harvest Moon.
Yep,
And then you followed it with Candles on Bay Street,
yep,
which I just finished reading, which is about Fort Kent.
it is.
And I want to talk about that if we can a little bit. And you've got another one coming out soon, another Cathie McKinnon book, the one about Nashville.
Yeah, that one is still, it's just finished, so it's
Is
going
that
out to be
Camilla?
sold.
Is that
Visiting Camilla.
Visiting Camilla, that's
Yeah,
what it's called.
but it won't be a year and a half, so watch, I'll start getting emails about where is the Camilla book.
Right. And but you also have a Cathie Pelletier book coming out.
I just finished it.
And that's
Yep.
called what? What's that called?
Running the Bulls.
Oh, yes, I did know that. That's right. And that is set where?
It's set in Maine, but it's,
Not Allagash.
no, and
No.
it's, the geography is not important at all
Okay. All right.
to the characters, which the Allagash books are.
What's the genesis of one of your books? You get an idea, what happens? Like with that book, what caused you to write it?
Well, I wanted to write another McKinnon book since the first one was selling so well. And I mean, it was just like a fire. It was amazing. And what do you do? I'm a writer. I don't wait for the muse to descend. I mean, I don't even know the muse.
You don't know what's going to happen, no.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of your job. So sometimes I have a bit of an idea. Usually if I'm 6 chapters in or so, then I start making notes on the end. Beaming Sunny Home, I wrote the ending. And thought, oh God, I'm going to have to write a novel up to this ending.
Go with the ending.
Yeah, because I really wanted to write a short story. So they're all different. But you know, it's funny when you go to talk to different students. I had a professor once say, tell them about the muse descending and how this is part of it. And I was stunned. You know, and not only that, students nowadays, they want the muse to bungee jump.
Oh yes,
I mean, the descending is not.
Well, it takes too long.
Yeah, and so I said, you know what, if I waited for a muse to descend, my electricity would be cut off. So that's the job of writing.
You said you were a hermit now? I mean,
I am.
What do you mean by being a hermit?
I'm obsessed with my writing, and I spend anywhere from 8 to 16 hours a day at my computer, to the point where my legs were hurting so much and swelling. And my friend Rose Kingsland, who's a writer in London, England, we email back and forth. We have our legs propped up, and we're both like these 2 hideously deformed crones who are still typing. And so as a result, you know, I used to hate writing. I still hate writing. I hate it with a passion. I like that I have written something when it's done. I feel I've accomplished something, but it's still just an awful job.
I know what you mean. You have to write, though.
Well, what am I going to do now?
I mean, you have to do something creative.
Take home ec. I don't know that that's true. You know, I guess it's true. I think I could spend most of my life looking at the clouds and sipping red wine. I think that's creative. But I make a living. And I do make a living as a writer and have for quite a while.
And you enjoy the career, and you're enjoying your career.
Well, I suppose.
You have now your own publishing company?
I started a small press.
But yet you made $1 million on the paperback of Casey McKinnon, the first Casey McKinnon book.
I don't know how much money the first one made. It made a lot of money.
Right.
I was paid $1 million advance for the second one, Candles on Bay Street.
Oh, the second one, okay.
And for an 80-page synopsis.
Okay. And you're now into film work.
I am. Now that is what I'm really enjoying writing. It's hard work. It's again those hours that I have to make myself. You asked, am I a hermit? I was telling you earlier that last year I didn't leave my house for 3 months, and then I had to go to the airport, and then I didn't leave again for 2 months. I go to the back patio with the dogs. I have a little bar at home, and so friends come about every 2 weeks. A few friends will come, and so I see people. But I really don't get out of my old ratty pajamas and a ponytail, and I really am quite. And when you do go out in an automobile, you go, whoa, whoa! It's amazing.
You're moving.
It's amazing. And then you go into a supermarket, and you go, God, look at the colors, look at the things. You know, so it's discovering things anew.
Now, didn't you, Cathie, tell me before, weren't you working with Hollywood? Didn't Hollywood pick up some of your early books to make into films? Yeah,
well, one of them has already been filmed. The first Casey McKinnon book, Columbia TriStar bought it. CBS is going to run it later this year, starring Jacqueline Bisset and Valerie Harper as the 2 main characters. I just optioned the second McKinnon book last week to a young progressive producer in Los Angeles who's loved it since the manuscript. And then I'm working with a few directors and small independent things that I've written. That's fun. I'm just going with a new film agent to see about selling a bigger budget things that I'm writing. And I've written 7 Pelletier novels, 3 McKinnon novels, 2 of the books based in country music. I think it's time to try something new.
That's right. Thank you.
My pleasure. From our spot there on the hilltop, we could see all of Fort Kent unrolled before us like a thick, warm rug, smoke rising from fireplace chimneys, yellow lights blinking on as though there were stars being born, little supernovas. Thomas Wolfe says you can't go home again. He meant that thought for the traveler, for the seeker who goes off into the world and then comes back to find that the place he left is irrevocably changed. But it applies to those of us who barely leave the houses where we were born and raised. It applies to all of us, for the past is lost to us forever.
What would you like to say, Cathie, to Maine people? You know.
Maine people.
Yes.
What would Maine people like to hear from me? Probably nothing. I've never gone anywhere in the world and had someone say to me, "Where are you from?" that I haven't said Maine. I live in Nashville. And I think that's what comes from having roots that go so deep,
Right.
8 generations back, 5 generations back, and on the same area. And you know, how do you can't buy that.
No.
Can't buy that. And I think there are people, you know, you pay a price for that as well. There's a negative side to that, but I wouldn't give it up.
Last night, I was squeezing